What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action star comes face to face with late-night television's most provocative host? You won't believe what unfolds when tensions explode between Dwayne, The Rock, Johnson, and Jimmy Kimmel in what witnesses are calling the most explosive celebrity confrontation in talk show history. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a career-defining moment that left audiences stunned and social media in absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Hollywood's nicest guy finally reaches his breaking point. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other, but what transpired between the host and his A-list guest has sent shockwaves throughout the entertainment industry. The Rock, known for his diplomatic demeanor and family-friendly image, found himself in the eye of a storm that nobody saw coming. The tension was palpable from the moment Johnson walked onto the stage. Unlike his usual energetic entrance, the superstar's body language spoke volumes before he even sat down. His trademark smile seemed forced, his handshake with Kimmel was notably brief, and those who know Johnson well could see something was bothering him. The audience, initially excited to see their favorite action hero, began to sense that something was off. Kimmel, never one to shy away from controversy, opened with what seemed like standard banter about Johnson's latest projects. But seasoned viewers of the show noticed the host's tone carried an edge that wasn't typical of celebrity interviews. His questions came loaded with subtle digs and passive-aggressive commentary that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "So, Dwayne, let's talk about your latest movie," Kimmel began, his voice carrying that familiar sardonic tone. "Another action flick where you save the world, flex your muscles, and somehow manage to keep your shirt on for maybe 5 minutes. Total. Tell me, do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again? Or is the paycheck just too good to pass up?" The question landed like a slap across the face. Johnson, who had been leaning back casually in his chair, straightened up immediately. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught every micro-expression. For a moment, the studio fell silent except for the uncomfortable shuffling of audience members who suddenly realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Well, Jimmy," Johnson replied, his voice maintaining its characteristic warmth, but with an underlying steel that hadn't been there moments before. "I've been blessed to work with incredible directors and talented casts who bring unique stories to life. Each project has its own challenges and rewards, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to entertain people around the world." But Kimmel wasn't finished. He pressed forward with a series of increasingly pointed questions about Johnson's business ventures, his social media presence, and what he called the manufactured authenticity of the Rock brand. Each question was delivered with Kimmel's trademark smirk, but there was a cruelty beneath the humor that made everyone in the studio increasingly uncomfortable. "You know what I find fascinating about you," Kimmel continued, leaning forward with that predatory gleam in his eyes that regular viewers knew meant trouble, "is how you've managed to convince everyone that you're this genuine, down-to-earth guy, when really you're one of the most calculated performers in Hollywood. I mean, come on, the whole people's champion thing? The motivational posts? The perfect family man image? It's all a bit much, don't you think?" The studio audience, who had come expecting laughs and lighthearted celebrity gossip, found themselves witnessing something far more sinister. Johnson's hands, which had been resting casually on the arms of his chair, slowly clenched into fists. His breathing became more deliberate, and those familiar with his wrestling background recognized the signs of someone fighting to maintain control. "Jimmy," Johnson said, his voice dropping to a lower register, "I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but I think we should probably steer this conversation in a different direction. I came here to talk about my work and connect with the fans, not to defend my character or my integrity." The response should have been a clear signal to any competent host to pull back, to redirect the conversation towards safer ground. But Kimmel, emboldened by the rising tension and perhaps sensing an opportunity for viral content, doubled down on his attack. "Oh, I think your character is exactly what we should be talking about," Kimmel shot back, his smile never wavering, even as his words grew more venomous. "Because that's really what you're selling, isn't it? This idea that you're different from other Hollywood stars? That you're somehow more authentic, more relatable? But behind all that muscle and those inspirational Instagram posts, you're just another actor with a carefully crafted image designed to separate people from their money. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Johnson's entire demeanor shifted in that moment, and everyone in the studio could feel the temperature drop. His publicist, sitting in the front row, looked like she was ready to bolt onto the stage and physically remove her client from what was rapidly becoming a disaster. "You know what, Jimmy?" Johnson said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge that made the security guards stationed around the studio unconsciously step closer. "I've sat through a lot of interviews over the years. I've dealt with tough questions, challenging topics, and hosts who wanted to make a name for themselves by trying to tear me down. But what you're doing right now, this isn't journalism. This isn't entertainment. This is just you being a bully with a platform." The accusation of bullying struck Kimmel like a physical blow. His perpetual smirk faltered for just a moment before returning with renewed intensity. The host's eyes narrowed, and those who knew him well could see that Johnson had just crossed a line that would lead to no mercy. "A bully?" Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "That's rich coming from someone who built his entire career on pretending to hurt people for entertainment. Tell me, Dwayne, when you were in that wrestling ring, throwing grown men around like rag dolls, were you worried about being a bully then? Or does that only count when someone calls out your act on national television?" The comparison was calculated and cruel, designed to minimize Johnson's athletic achievements and reduce his wrestling career to mere performance art. But more than that, it was a fundamental misunderstanding or deliberate misrepresentation of what professional wrestling actually represents to millions of fans around the world. That Johnson's response was immediate and electric. He leaned forward in his chair, his massive frame suddenly seeming to fill the entire studio. "You want to talk about my wrestling career, Jimmy? Let's talk about it. For over a decade, I stepped into that ring night after night, performing for crowds just like this one, giving everything I had to entertain people who worked hard all week and deserved a few hours of escape. I put my body on the line. I earned every single cheer and every single boo, and I did it with respect for the business and the fans who made it all possible." The passion in Johnson's voice was undeniable, and for the first time since the interview began, the studio audience found themselves genuinely engaged rather than simply uncomfortable. But Kimmel, perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the narrative, decided to escalate even further. "Oh, please," Kimmel scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Spare me the noble warrior routine. You were an entertainer in underwear, rolling around with other sweaty men for the amusement of people who couldn't tell the difference between reality and fiction. And now you want us to treat that like it was some kind of sacred calling? Come on, Dwayne. Even you have to see how ridiculous that sounds." The insult was designed to be the killing blow, the moment that would reduce Johnson to either silent fury or defensive stammering. But Kimmel had made a crucial miscalculation. He had attacked not just Johnson personally, but something that millions of people around the world held dear. And in that moment, Johnson transformed from a defensive celebrity into something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and everything to say. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point, and everyone present knew that what happened next would define not just the rest of the interview, but potentially the careers of both men sitting across from each other. Johnson's eyes locked onto Kimmel's with an intensity that made the host's confident smirk begin to waver for the first time since the interview began. "You know what, Jimmy?" Johnson said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the studio to lean forward to catch his words. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is trying to tear me down for their own entertainment. But what you just said, that crossed a line that you can't uncross." The studio fell into an eerie silence. Even the usually bustling backstage crew had stopped their movements, sensing that something monumental was happening. Johnson slowly rose from his chair, his 6'5" frame casting a shadow across Kimmel's desk. The host, for the first time in the interview, looked genuinely unsettled. "Sit down, Dwayne," Kimmel said, attempting to regain control of the situation with a nervous laugh. "We're just having a conversation here. No need to get all worked up over some harmless ribbing." But Johnson didn't sit. Instead, he took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence filling the space between them with an energy that made everyone in the studio acutely aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. Harmless ribbing, Johnson repeated, his voice now carrying the full weight of his barely contained fury. Is that what you call disrespecting an entire industry and the millions of people who find joy and inspiration in it? Kimmel, perhaps, realizing he had pushed too far, but unable to back down without losing face, decided to double down on his attack. Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just calling it like I see it. Professional wrestling is fake. Everyone knows it's fake, and pretending otherwise is just insulting to your audience's intelligence. The word fake hit the studio like a thunderclap. Johnson's hands gripped the edge of Kimmel's desk, his knuckles turning white with the pressure. The cameras captured every detail of his face as a mixture of rage and disappointment played across his features. Fake, he said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. Let me tell you what's fake, Jimmy. What's fake is sitting behind that desk, hiding behind your writers and your production team, taking cheap shots at people who actually put themselves on the line for their art. The audience, who had been uncomfortably silent, began to murmur among themselves. Some were clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, while others seemed to be rooting for Johnson to continue his verbal assault on their host. The energy in the room was electric and dangerous. Kimmel, sensing the crowd's sympathy shifting toward his guest, attempted to regain control through humor. Wow, somebody's really upset about their pretend fighting career, he said with a forced laugh. Maybe we should get you a participation trophy to make you feel better. The joke fell flat, met with uncomfortable silence from an audience that was no longer laughing with their host, but beginning to turn against him. Johnson's response was swift and devastating. You want to talk about pretend, Jimmy? Let's talk about this whole setup. You sitting there in your designer suit, reading jokes written by other people, pretending to be funny while you systematically tear down anyone who threatens your fragile ego. At least when I was in that ring, I was honest about what I was doing. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Kimmel's face flushed red, and his usual composure began to crack. My fragile ego, he shot back, his voice rising for the first time. That's hilarious coming from someone who can't handle a few tough questions without having a meltdown on national television. Johnson leaned forward, placing both hands flat on Kimmel's desk, bringing himself eye level with the host. Tough questions? Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a desperate attempt to create controversy at the expense of someone who came here in good faith. The proximity between the two men was now uncomfortably close, and security guards positioned around the studio began to move slightly closer to the stage. The head of security could be seen speaking quietly into his earpiece, clearly preparing for the possibility that the situation might escalate beyond words. Good faith. Kimmel laughed bitterly, his mask of professional composure now completely fallen away. You came here to promote your latest generic action movie, just like every other actor who sits in that chair. Don't pretend this is some noble mission to enlighten the masses. Johnson straightened up slowly, his full height now towering over the seated host. You're right about one thing, Jimmy. I did come here to promote my movie. But more than that, I came here because I believed in treating people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. Clearly, I was wrong about you. The personal attack struck Kimmel like a physical blow. His eyes narrowed, and any pretense of professional behavior evaporated completely. Don't deserve it? That's rich coming from someone who built his entire career on manufactured controversy and fake conflicts. At least I'm honest about what I do for a living. The hypocrisy of the statement was stunning. Here was a talk show host whose entire career was built on scripted monologues and staged interviews, accusing a professional athlete and actor of being fake. The audience began to shift restlessly, and several people could be heard expressing their disapproval of Kimmel's behavior. Johnson took a deep breath, his massive chest rising and falling as he fought to maintain control. You know what, Jimmy? I've been in enough real fights to know when someone is trying to start one. And I've been in enough fake ones to recognize when someone is performing for an audience. What you're doing right now, this isn't entertainment. This isn't even good television. This is just a sad little man trying to make himself feel important by tearing down someone better than him. The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep into Kimmel's professional pride and personal insecurities. The host's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually stand up and physically confront his guest. Better than me, Kimmel snarled, his voice dripping with venom. You're a juiced-up has-been who peaked in a fake sport and now makes the same terrible movie over and over again. You want to talk about sad? Look in the mirror, musclehead. The epithet, musclehead, was the final straw. Johnson's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, and the room erupted in tension as he leaned back over the desk, bringing his face inches from Kimmel's. Say that again, he whispered, his voice carrying a threat that made everyone in the studio freeze. Kimmel, perhaps finally realizing he had pushed too far, attempted to backtrack. Look, maybe we should just… No. Johnson cut him off, his voice now booming through the studio. You wanted to do this, Jimmy. You wanted to disrespect me, my career, my fans, and everything I've worked for. So let's finish it. Say it again. The challenge was unmistakable, and the studio held its collective breath as the two men stared each other down. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For the first time in the interview, he seemed to understand that he had awakened something in Johnson that he was not prepared to handle. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the sound of cameras continuing to roll and the distant murmur of a crowd that no longer knew whether to cheer or flee. Whatever happened next would define not just the remainder of this interview, but potentially change the trajectory of both men's careers forever. Johnson slowly straightened up, his massive frame casting an imposing shadow across the entire desk. The cameras captured every micro-expression on his face as he made a decision that would resonate far beyond this studio. You know what, Jimmy, he said, his voice now calm but carrying an unmistakable finality. I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else in this room. My career, my integrity, and my respect for people speak for themselves. Kimmel, perhaps sensing an opportunity to regain some semblance of control, attempted to interject. Look, maybe we got a little heated there, but no. Johnson cut him off with a raised hand, his tone brooking no argument. You don't get to backtrack now. You made your choice when you decided to turn what should have been a respectful conversation into a personal attack. You showed everyone watching exactly who you are, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that's acceptable. The studio audience, who had been caught between discomfort and fascination throughout the confrontation, began to murmur their approval. Several people could be heard clapping, and the energy in the room shifted palpably as Johnson's dignity in the face of Kimmel's attacks resonated with viewers who had grown tired of their host's increasingly cruel behavior. Kimmel's face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, embarrassment, and what looked like genuine fear as he realized the situation was spiraling completely beyond his control. Dwayne, come on, this is live television. We can work this out like adults. Johnson let out a laugh that contained no humor whatsoever. Adults? Jimmy, adults don't ambush their guests with personal attacks. Adults don't try to humiliate people for cheap laughs. Adults certainly don't double down when they're called out for their behavior. What you've done here tonight isn't adult behavior. It's the petulant tantrum of someone who's forgotten that being behind that desk is a privilege, not a right. The words hit Kimmel like physical blows, and his usual quick wit seemed to have completely abandoned him. He sat in his chair, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, while one of the most beloved figures in entertainment systematically dismantled his credibility in front of millions of viewers. You want to know what's really fake, Jimmy? Johnson continued, his voice rising with passion. What's fake is pretending that cruelty is comedy. What's fake is hiding behind a team of writers and producers while you systematically tear down people who have the courage to put themselves out there. What's fake is building a career on making others feel small so you can feel big. The audience erupted in applause, many people rising to their feet in support of Johnson's words. The sound was thunderous, drowning out any attempt Kimmel might have made to respond. For several long moments, the studio was filled with the sound of genuine appreciation for someone finally calling out behavior that many had found increasingly uncomfortable to watch. Johnson raised his hand for silence, and the crowd immediately complied, hanging on his every word. I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with fans, and to hopefully bring some joy to people who work hard and deserve a few minutes of entertainment. Instead, I've been subjected to a calculated attempt to embarrass and diminish me for the amusement of others. He turned slightly to address the cameras directly, his presence commanding and his message clear. To everyone watching at home, especially the young people who might be seeing this, you don't have to accept being treated poorly by anyone, no matter how much power they think they have. Respect is earned, not demanded, and when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. The impact of his words was immediate and powerful. In the control room, producers could be seen frantically trying to figure out how to handle a situation that had completely escaped their control. Some were making cutting motions across their throats, suggesting they should go to commercial, while others seemed transfixed by the raw authenticity of what was unfolding. Kimmel, perhaps realizing that every second of continued silence made him look weaker, attempted one final desperate gambit. You know what, Dwayne? Maybe you're right. Maybe I did push too hard tonight. But that's what good interviewers do. They ask the tough questions that other people won't ask. The weak attempt at justification only served to make Johnson's response more devastating. Tough questions, he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. Jimmy, there's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks. A tough question challenges someone to think deeper or explain their position. What you did tonight was just mean-spirited bullying disguised as journalism. Johnson began to remove his microphone, the simple action carrying enormous symbolic weight. A real interviewer knows how to challenge their guests while still maintaining basic human decency. They understand that their job is to inform and entertain, not to humiliate and destroy. Tonight, you've shown everyone watching that you've forgotten that fundamental principle. The microphone hit Kimmel's desk with a soft thud that somehow seemed to echo through the entire studio. Johnson straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. To everyone who has supported me throughout my career, in wrestling, in movies, and in life, thank you for believing in me. Your faith means more than any host's opinion ever could. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Dwayne, wait. Don't walk out. We can. Johnson turned back to face him one final time, his expression combining disappointment with something approaching pity. Jimmy, I've spent my entire career respecting this business and the people in it. I've treated every interview, every appearance, every interaction as an opportunity to give something positive to the world. Tonight, you've shown me that not everyone shares that philosophy. He paused, letting his words sink in not just to Kimmel, but to everyone in the studio and watching at home. I won't be part of a show that thinks cruelty is entertainment. I won't sit here and pretend that what happened tonight is acceptable. And I won't give you another second of my time when there are millions of people out there who deserve better. With that, Johnson turned and began walking toward the exit. The studio erupted in chaos as audience members leaped to their feet, many of them applauding and cheering as he made his way through the crowd. People reached out to shake his hand, to pat his shoulder, to express their support for his decision to stand up for himself and his principles. Kimmel sat behind his desk, looking smaller and more defeated than anyone had ever seen him. His usual bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by the hollow expression of someone who had just witnessed their carefully constructed persona crumble in real time. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of his humiliation. In Johnson's triumphant exit, as Johnson reached the studio exit, he turned one final time to address the crowd. "Remember," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "You deserve to be treated with respect, no matter who's asking the questions. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for their entertainment." The studio doors closed behind him with a definitive sound that seemed to mark the end of more than just an interview. In the silence that followed, Kimmel sat alone at his desk, surrounded by an audience that was no longer laughing with him, cameras that had captured his complete professional breakdown, and the wreckage of what had once been his carefully cultivated image as television's sardonic, but ultimately harmless provocateur. The show limped to its conclusion with Kimmel mumbling through a few scripted jokes that fell flat in the wake of what everyone had just witnessed. But the real story was already over. In less than 30 minutes, Dwayne Johnson had transformed from victim to victor, from defensive guest to moral authority, and from target to teacher. He had shown millions of viewers that dignity and self-respect were more important than any paycheck or publicity opportunity As the credits rolled and the studio lights dimmed, everyone present knew they had witnessed something unprecedented in television history. The moment when Hollywood's nicest guy had finally had enough, and in standing up for himself, had reminded everyone else that they deserved better too. The confrontation that had started as Kimmel's attempt to tear down a guest had ended with his own credibility in ruins and Johnson walking away with his integrity not just intact, but stronger than ever.